All right, we are live. Welcome to Liberal Discourses, the space on X where we take the opportunity to explore topics that may not be getting enough attention. My name is Vanessa, and I will be your host for the evening as we explore the Alberta Next Panel and their proposals as they undertake a province-wide consultation to chart their path, secure their economy, and assert their sovereignty within a united Canada. This is the second episode of a 6-week series that will cover each of the ideas that has been proposed by the Alberta Next Panel. And tonight, we're talking about the idea of an Alberta pension plan. I'm joined this evening by my three panelists, Val, Steve, and Josh. Now, each of them has a different take on the issue of Alberta sovereignty and independence, so this should be an interesting conversation. But I'd like to ask each of them to come up, say hi, introduce themselves, and where they stand on the issue of Alberta. And we'll start with Val, and then we'll go to Steve and then Josh.
Hi, I'm Val the Pal. I believe I know everyone in this room already, so I don't need too many introductions right now. In the past, I've talked about how I had a prior history in the finance industry for about 15 years, and I currently work in a different industry. I am a very strong Alberta independence supporter, and so usually my opinions on what Alberta is doing reflect that in our discussions.
Thank you, Val. Steve?
Hello, I'm Steve. I have a little podcast of my own, and I thank Vanessa and Josh for inviting me again to speak on this panel. My stance on Alberta independence is that I think they should start the decades-long assimilation period to become the 51st state instead of trying to take a shortcut with a referendum vote, which will ultimately fail. Back to you, Vanessa. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Steve. And Josh.
Hello, Vanessa, panelists. I'm Josh for Canada. I live here in Ontario. Loyal she remains. This year's subject is of great interest to me because I think for the better part of 40 years, it has been misunderstood and ignored. This is a great opportunity for us to get to the facts of the matter to see if Alberta sovereignty is a plan or an idea or a movement that is rational and will benefit Canadian citizens living in Alberta. So as we go through this process, I'm open to having my mind changed. And overall, it's an excellent endeavor to better understand the sort of core mechanics of the Alberta sovereignty project, as it were. Back to you, Vanessa.
All right, thank you, Josh. Okay, so the discussion is set to run for 1 hour, but if we need more time to thoroughly explore the topic, I'll simply run the clock a little bit longer and let it come to its natural conclusion. After that, we'll open it up to the floor for a question and answer session to hear questions, comments, or perspectives that our listeners this evening might have on the Alberta Next and the proposal of an Alberta pension plan. So I do want to thank all of my panelists for taking time to take part in tonight's discussion. Because the Alberta government isn't here to represent themselves and with the aim of trying to be fair to them, I'm going to play the Alberta Next video on pensions. That way everybody will have a few minutes to listen, settle in, and get prepared to discuss this extremely large and important topic. So with that in mind, we're going to cue up the video.
The Alberta Next Panel is touring Alberta to hear from Albertans on how our province can better protect ourselves from Ottawa's economic attacks while building a more prosperous, strong, and sovereign Alberta within Canada. A provincial referendum on some of these ideas is coming in 2026. But what's on that referendum ballot and what happens next for Alberta is up to you. One idea being discussed by the panel is creating an Alberta pension plan with the same or better benefits than the Canada pension plan. With a younger and more productive workforce, Alberta workers contribute about $3 billion more each year to the Canada pension plan than Alberta seniors receive in benefits. Alberta has the constitutional right to exit the CPP. And if we did, federal legislation says that Alberta would be entitled to a sizable share of the CPP assets that we could use to start our own provincial pension plan, so long as we guarantee comparable pension benefits for seniors. Quebec made the decision to start its own pension plan decades ago, and they have an agreement with Ottawa so that all retirees receive their full pension benefits, whether they worked in Quebec, retired there, or some mix of both. Alberta could negotiate a similar arrangement with Ottawa if we created our own pension plan. There are more factors to consider as well. Currently, virtually all investment decisions and management of the CPP is conducted by folks working in Ottawa and Toronto rather than Alberta. While the CPP's mandate is to maximize pension returns, in recent years, the CPP annual reports have shown an increasing focus on emissions reductions and DEI concerns, which do not always result in the highest rate of returns for the pension plan. CPP management has also become bloated and expensive. 20 years ago, the CPP had only 150 employees, with operating costs of $118 million. Today, it has ballooned to more than 2,100 employees, with operating costs of about $6 billion. If Alberta opted to commence its own pension plan, the fund would be managed out of Alberta by Albertans, and investments could be focused exclusively on maximizing returns rather than adjusting for carbon dioxide and DEI-related objectives. With that all said, the CPP has consistently generated healthy returns and is a stable and critical source of income for seniors in Alberta and Canada. So, what are the benefits of Alberta choosing to withdraw from the CPP to create its own pension plan? 1. A big upfront payout. Alberta would get back a significant lump sum by exiting the CPP. The chief actuary in Ottawa has indicated our share would be at least $140 billion. That's plenty to start and build a strong Alberta pension plan from day one. 2. Better benefits for seniors, lower premiums for Alberta workers. Thanks to our younger, more productive population, an Alberta pension plan could result in Alberta workers paying lower pension premiums on their paychecks, or seniors enjoying higher pension benefits, or a mix of both. 3. Local control and boosting our economy. An Alberta pension plan would be managed right here at home, creating more jobs and growing Alberta's financial sector. We would also be insulated from the economic and demographic decline in Canada. Our investment decisions could also be steered clear of ideological decision-making and instead remain focused on the long-term rate of return for Alberta pensioners. But there are some risks to consider. 1. Uncertain payout. The CPP exit rules aren't clear in the federal legislation, and Ottawa is notoriously anti-Alberta with its decisions. So the size of the lump sum Alberta is offered could be lower than it should be. This could result in a lengthy court battle with the federal government, and it could lower our ability to increase benefit payments for seniors or lower premiums for workers. 2. Long-term risk. As with any pension plan, if the plan is mismanaged or Alberta's economy and demographics fall behind Canada, premiums would have to rise in the future in order to guarantee our seniors the same benefits they enjoy today under the CPP. Regardless, as with Quebec, Alberta's government would still be able to guarantee that an Alberta pension plan provide the same or better benefits to Alberta seniors as they now enjoy under the CPP. 3. Portability concerns. The Quebec pension plan and CPP have an agreement in place to ensure pensioners get the same single pension, regardless of where they worked or lived in Canada during their career. Alberta would expect a similar arrangement with Ottawa, but it is not guaranteed. So, should Alberta withdraw from the CPP and use Alberta's portion of the CPP to create our own Alberta pension plan? Or should we continue with the CPP as we do now? For more information, visit alberta.ca/next.
All right. So there we go. We've got the general gist of what it is that the Alberta Next is currently focusing on. So I suppose a good place to start would be When it comes to pensions, it seems that the people who are most interested are either currently retired or going to retire in the next few years. But the argument here relates to Alberta's younger workforce. So I suppose one question or one place to start would be, do you think younger Albertans might see the benefit of an Alberta pension plan? Are they involved in the conversation? What do you think? And maybe we'll start with Val.
I think that there are a number of youth that are involved in the conversation, but not as many as you would hope. Honestly, I don't think when people are younger, they really think too hard into it. So they don't really pay attention to what's going on. However, this issue is unique in the sense that it is related to potential Alberta independence. So you probably have a higher level of people looking at this particular issue than you would otherwise. You bring up an interesting point because the demographics in Alberta, we do have a younger workforce, but it's not as young as when the CPP, for example, was first introduced. And so that plays a part in how long contributions have to be going on and how the pension fund builds. So it's an interesting dynamic to try and involve in the calculation of this entire giant situation.
You're quite correct. I mean, at the time that the CPP was formed, I do believe the overall median age was something like 25 years old, whereas for Canada now it's close to mid 30s, well, late 30s. So it does, you can definitely see the baby boom has moved its way through time. Steve, what do you think about the youth? Is the message, are they paying attention to this topic, to a pension? Are they thinking about legacy? What do you think might be going on there?
I don't really think it matters. I'm anti-pension plans. Like, nobody has a say. I think it's a loss of individual freedom and personal responsibility. And having said that, I understand that it's here, and even breaking away from the CPP, they are still in charge. The federal government is still in charge of what kind of a provincial pension program that you can have. Like, as your article mentioned earlier. So I don't think it matters if they're aware or not, and that's the whole problem with it, because they should be able to privatize their own pension by walking in and planning with an advisor, or learning on their own and investing the way they see fit, or not invest at all.
Go ahead, Val.
I actually agree with Steve on a personal level. I don't believe in forced pension plans as well. So this topic is particularly frustrating for me to go through, but that doesn't speak for everyone. And there are members of the Alberta population that definitely benefit from a national pension plan. So I've taken that standpoint as what's better for everyone. But I also agree that people can do a lot better if they invest their funds elsewhere to get a better sizable return just because of the way the pension plan of the national CPP pays out. It's not, I don't find it fair, but like I was saying, it doesn't apply. My opinion doesn't apply to everyone. So I think Alberta should have its own pension plan to cover the variety of individuals who would rely on it.
Well, you make an interesting point, because when it was created in 1965, the long-term strategy actually was for it to be not just a self-sustaining plan, but that it was supposed to complement other retirement income sources. Um, there was an expectation, basically, that if you could afford to have a pension plan, or if there's one provided through work, that would be the way to go, so you can really look after yourself in retirement. But there are a segment, of course, of the population who, for whatever reason, they don't have that available through their place of work. So that's one of the reasons why a universal, just to make sure everybody was covered, system was thought of as an important idea. But Josh, I want to get back to the issue of youth. And now, youth, I mean, are they paying attention to this conversation? Do they have incentive to, or is this just a little too far off in the distance for them?
Of course, they don't pay attention to this, Vanessa. We're dealing with pensions here. The people who would be directly affected in the short term, obviously, are baby boomers or Gen Xers approaching retirement. This isn't an issue of which the youth of Alberta would be heavily invested in, other than a sort of a footnote or a building block related to the sovereignty issue as a whole. Now, it is important for us to understand where this comes from. And by and large, Stephen Harper's firewall letter again comes up. He wrote this in 2001. Tom Flanagan, Ted Morton, Rainer Kopp. There was a bunch of people that signed on to this firewall letter, and they handed it to Ralph Klein. In this firewall letter, they do make a recommendation related to an Alberta pension plan, and I'll just quote from the firewall letter, quote, withdraw from the Canada pension plan to create an Alberta pension plan offering the same benefits at lower cost while giving Alberta control over the investment fund. The Canadian pension plan is not only a tax, it is a tax imposed by Ottawa with no guarantee that Albertans will ever get back what they put in. Quebec has never been a part of the CPP, and its pension plan has helped to create a nest egg for Quebecers and to build powerful provincial institutions such as the Caisse de dépôt et placement. Got to work on my French. So yes, the infamous firewall letter included a recommendation for the Alberta pension plan. Now, with respect to the firewall letter, we have to understand that this was quite a bold statement at the time. It was released January 2001, and it is interesting to note that later that year, the leader of the Canadian Alliance Party, Stockwell Day, announced that he would not be running for re-election. Harper stepped up, and a year after the firewall letter was released, Stephen Harper was then the leader of the Canadian Alliance Party. So to me, Vanessa, this issue is one of which the youth of Alberta is inheriting from years past. This plan has been discussed since around 2001. And I'm not sure if the youth of today have ever been invited into that discussion at all.
Okay, so then the next question would be, how do you invite them in? How do you get their interest? Or do you believe it's going to be more attached to the fact that Alberta, this separation question, independence question is floating around, and that's kind of one way to sneak it in through the side door, so to speak?
I suppose I'd ask you, Vanessa, why is it important that the youth are involved in this conversation?
Well, because the youth, first of all, it is the selling point that Alberta does have a young population. That would be the reason for the Alberta pension plan. And there's enough young people to replace and replenish the pension plan if Alberta was to seek one out. But having said that, of course, the youth themselves, this is about their legacy. And grandchildren's and great-grandchildren's and so on. And they are, like all youth, a bit invincible and will never get old, as you do. But it is important for them to be included in this, because this will affect them later down the line when it does actually become important as they get into their 50s. So that's why I think it's important to make sure that they're brought in at least a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to go on to my next question here. So Alberta has a constitutional right to exit the Canada Pension Plan, but as they pointed out, the CPP exit rules aren't clear. And this is because at the time, Quebec had its, at the time the CPP was created, Quebec said, that's it, we're going to create our own. And so no other province has really brought up this point since then. Do you think that if Alberta is successful and goes ahead, that other provinces might be encouraged to pursue their own pension plans?
I think this is putting the cart before the horse, Vanessa. This Alberta pension plan, I'm not sure if it is going to be pursued by the provincial government itself. This conversation of an Alberta pension plan is, again, a point, a part of a whole package, just like the Alberta police service was as well. So in order for the Alberta pension plan to be actualized, then the sovereignty or the separation would actually have to be actualized as well. And right now, only 30% of Albertans support separation. So would this be contagious amongst other provinces? No. I mean, if we get into the data here, then we can really start analyzing what the ramifications would be if Alberta were to create their own pension plan. And there's quite a lot of obstacles here that Albertans writ large would have to reckon with if they were to pursue this.
Well, to be fair now, let's remember that when it comes to issues of healthcare, pensions, etc., that was deemed by the federal government at the time that they were creating the British North America Act. Those responsibilities, those lesser responsibilities, were to fall to provinces' jurisdiction. That was why Quebec was able to make that argument at the time that a Canada Pension Plan was proposed, that pensions fell under the jurisdiction of provinces. So, Steve, I want to get your thoughts on this. Do you think that if Alberta were to create its own pension plan and be successful, do you think other provinces might show an interest?
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. Yeah, I hope it. I don't know how to answer that with a yes or no. I don't think I can answer if it'll create a domino effect, but I'm hoping not. And that might sound different from the themes of what I've been saying in the past couple of times that we spoke. But since I really do think independence is never going to happen, I find that this further balkanizes the country and solidifies tribalism. So just take like what they said on the Alberta Next Panel, or the commercial that you played. I'm supposed to, for some reason, I'm supposed to care if an Albertan senior, if the taxes that come off of my wage end up in the pockets of an Alberta senior, why am I supposed to care more as opposed to a senior in Ontario or Newfoundland? I don't understand. I think it's more symbolic than anything. And if independence was actually achievable, then I would say let's hope that this happens. But I think it's one of those things where I think we should respect people more, the individual liberties and rights of people more who live on the outside of our provincial boundaries. And I think that's the message that Alberta should be sending instead of kind of going isolationist or protectionist. So I hope it doesn't domino.
Okay. Well, that I wasn't expecting that. Val, what are your thoughts on this? Could this create a domino effect?
I actually agree with Josh, but not for the same reasons. Um, I think that out of provinces that have the ability to fund a pension plan of their own, they're kind of few and far between. And I don't mean that in a defamatory way or anything like that. But I know that Alberta is capable of doing it. Would other provinces consider it? Absolutely. Would it be as feasible as somewhere like here? Maybe. But for a lot of provinces, maybe not. And we're at a very difficult time economically in Canada. So any changes like this that involve a lot of money are potentially not a very good time to do so. So I'm a little bit more nervous about a Alberta pension plan than I am actual Alberta independence, believe it or not. So would it cause a domino effect? Possibly. Would it happen immediately? No. Might it be something that another province adopts in 10 years? Maybe. But I don't think a lot of provinces would be jumping at the bit for that type of cost if they couldn't fiscally afford it.
Well, you make an
Yeah. Oh, sorry. No, I think she touched on it's definitely a redistribution of wealth scheme. I would say so. Other provinces like Prince Edward Island probably couldn't afford to have their own.
Okay, so here's a question for you then, because we do have some objection to the idea of a wealth distribution scheme. Let's put it that way. Should then companies be put into a position where they must offer pension plans to their employees, therefore it's encouraging people to join the workforce because you would have a benefit. And it would, one of the reasons why, of course, the pension plan was created was to cover for those people who didn't have that availability because it just wasn't offered through their place of work. Should that be the way to go then? Go ahead, Val.
I'm not sure why we're sort of talking about dismembering the CPP. The CPP is one of the most trusted, stable, it's a massive pot of wealth there. I can grab the data there, but it has grown immensely since its conception, and it's extremely stable and dependable. By and large, the rates have remained the same. They were the same for 16 years, and then recently they went up, in recent times. So, I mean, if it's not broke, why fix it? And when we're talking about other provinces entering into this, this is ridiculous because not every province is the same. The main reasons why Alberta would entertain this is because they have a population there that is on average 3 years younger. And the reason why they would entertain this as well is because Albertans earn more than every other province on average. The average Albertan makes $70,826. BC is second at $67,000. Ontario is all the way down there at $69,000. Immigration rates in Alberta are extremely high in comparison to other provinces. So this is not a reality. There's no way provinces would ever consider fragmenting something that we're proud of. It's an institution, so I'm just not sure where the impetus for this sort of decoupling would come from. It does not make any sense for the baby boomers.
Go ahead, Val.
I think there's a lot of reasons we could talk about, Josh, and get into for the reasons for and against. But to address Vanessa's question there about the onus being on companies, what I've noticed in the finance industry for the last 30 years is the slow withdrawal from offering pensions to employees or the reduction in benefits or structures of the pension plans. The companies that end up and the institutions that end up retaining their pension plans are the ones that have very strong unions. And unfortunately, there's a lot of companies that don't realize it's one of the best ways to actually entice talent to come and work for you and stay with you. So it would be nice if there was more of an incentive on companies because as you said, the Canada pension plan was never designed to be your entire retirement savings. So you're supposed to be doing it elsewhere, and a company pension plan definitely increases that benefit, especially if your company helps contribute it to it on your behalf as well. So it would be nice if there was some legislation in that area to try and encourage that more, but I don't see that coming down the pipeline. I've seen companies withdraw from them because, well, some of them are greedy and some of them, just need the cost savings because it is very expensive for a company to do so.
Excellent point. Steve.
Yeah, I just want to respond to one of Josh's questions. I know it was just rhetorical, but I think what Alberta is going for is or Danielle Smith here is a symbolic victory. Because I largely agree with Vanessa's conclusion at the end of her essay that she wrote that unless what's actually better, is it really going to change much in the terms of your life? And I find it's going to be a long climb uphill for that. And there's some doubts in there as well if they can actually get what they put into it from Ottawa. So I think they're going for some symbolism, and I had another point what Val said, but I think I lost it. So over to you, Vanessa.
All right. Well, I mean, I love getting these perspectives on this because, it's not something we almost take it for granted. If you think about it, it's one of those things that's there and we don't really contemplate it until we actually need it. So, but to the point that Josh made earlier, in 1996, the CPP reserve fund stood at about 40 billion. Today, it's at 714 billion. Now, if you were to go and look at the annual report from the CPP investments for 2024, it shows that their portfolio, as far as investment goes, Canada, they've only invested 12% in our economy, the remainder being international, so 47% in the United States, 19% in Europe, 17% in Asia Pacific, and 5% in Latin America. The Quebec pension plan does a little bit better. They've got 20% of their portfolio invested in Quebec and the rest internationally by and large. So I want to find out from you and get your thoughts on this. Do you think that there's an adequate ratio of investment in Canada versus globally, or should the CPP investments be trying to focus more on investment in Canada itself? We'll start with.
Excellent question. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
So I would say actually in the CPP, having 12% invested within Canada is actually quite high. So in the world of investments, when I dealt with individuals and doing planning for them, um, well, what you're trying to do with a plan like this is you're trying to generate your revenues, right? And historically speaking, Canada can have a couple or a handful of sectors or companies that are expected to have good returns for a short period of time, or are very volatile in when they have good returns and not good returns. So typically 12% is actually quite high when you're building an investment portfolio in the billions. So I actually think it's actually very inclusive. Now, the other flip side of that, to be fair, is that where you invest does help promote the economy. So if Canada was trying to use the CPP in order to promote the economy and stimulate growth, it might try and go in that direction. However, you're not going to see that in any sustainable or large way in terms of the returns. So what Quebec did is promote their growth internally with their 20%, right? And that makes sense because they can focus on those specific industries that they are trying to build at that time. And they can also adjust their investments significantly quicker than a CPP plan can. So those are my thoughts on that.
Well, that's interesting that you think it's rather high. I'm interested to find out from Steve. What are your thoughts on this, Steve?
A couple things. I'll be quick because I remember what I wanted to say now about. Josh brought up the point about Alberta's workforce being younger, and I agree that it's ridiculous because that's so short to talk about getting your own pension plan as a province. That is, I agree because it's so short-sighted. I mean, we live in a dynamic world, in a dynamic country where things are subject to change. And yeah, for now, Alberta's workforce might be on average 3 years younger, but that could all change. So yeah, I agree that it's not a long-term solution because it'll just be subject to the same corruption as what the CPP is now, or whatever else Alberta has a problem with. And but going back to Val, it's something I never thought of before, that they're using the pension to invest in their own provincial industries, like buying stocks, and so they can fund research and development. And I never thought of it that way. I still don't think you should do that. You should invest, if you're in charge of the fund, then you should be investing in the best ones you can find worldwide, because it's not your money. It's the people who you stole it from off their wages, particularly the young people working who can't even afford a house right now. So yeah, back to you, Vanessa.
All right, thank you, Steve. Josh, what do you think? 12% of the investment portfolio is in Canada. The other remaining is international. What do you think? Too high, too low? Want to get your impression on that.
I think it's a slippery slope. The CPP is managed independently. Justin Trudeau couldn't get his hands on it. Previous prime ministers either. That's a large sum of money, of which any prime minister manufacturing the bills, of which our prime ministers in modern day would like to get their hands on that and allocate it accordingly. So I do think it's fine the way it is. It's fine the way it is. It's working, as you had just said there. So I'm very pragmatic in this sense there, Vanessa. It's not broke, so I'm not even going to try to fix it.
Appreciate that. Well, it leads me to my next question, though. If the CPP works to minimize the level of market risk, okay, because you would want to do that, especially when you're talking about a pension fund. So if you want to minimize risk sufficient and you want to have your returns sufficient to maintain long-term sustainability, does perhaps the lack of investment in Canada send a signal that investors view Canada as a high-risk market? Do you think that that might be coming across?
Well, definitely.
I'm not entirely sure on that. Oh, go ahead, Val.
It definitely is. Yeah, when you talk to bigger companies when they're investing their money and whatnot, I mean, it's very rare that they're interested in the types of investments that come out of Canada specifically. So, um, I honestly don't think it crosses anyone's mind. I don't think they say look at the CPP and say, "Oh, look, it's only 13%." I just don't think they're looking at Canada investments at all, unless you're a company that's actually going to go and build something there. It usually doesn't happen at all.
Well, yeah, it's hard for me to get into the mind of some of these brilliant economists that are running the CPP. But I would surmise if you have the whole world at your disposal and you can invest in anything you want, whatever, um, why provide any sort of limitations on that? So I don't think this 12% figure here is reflective of our economy at all. Um, it just means that many of our companies, let's say, uh, in rank order, they may not be the best option, but they're still a good option. It's an extremely complex question there, Vanessa, and it's rooted in hypotheticals, but I don't think it's indicative of our economy at all, because we're talking about investing worldwide. So, we could be competitive in a variety of fields, but that doesn't mean it's the best investment when compared to something else.
But we do want to encourage investment in Canada. So let me ask, Steve, does the lack of investment by the minimal 12% indicate that Canada is a little more high risk to investors, signaling that worldwide? What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's sort of a self-incrimination because my opinion, I would not invest in Canada. I don't invest in Canada, and I don't plan on in the near future. It's not a good political climate for it, and that's not because of Alberta independence. It's just because the Liberals keep winning. It's been over a decade now, and there's no end in sight. So, I mean, if they're actually being honest over there in the fund, who's ever running it, whatever group of people, I mean, if that's their attitude towards your own country, then that should be sort of a compass to create change. And we need to go in the other direction. And when those investments go up, that shows confidence, and that's how you know you're going in the right direction.
I mean, they have a primary consideration here. When we suggest that this is an indictment on Canadians, we have to look at the opposite. Their mandate is to grow the CPP, and as you said there, we now have $714 billion in there, enough to support all of us for a long time, right? So they're doing their job very well, and they're doing so on behalf of Canadians. They're growing the pot. So I think we're kind of selling them short. Their mandate is to increase the CPP. They're doing that, and they're doing so for Canadians.
Okay, well, that brings me sort of to my next question, because one of the things that the Alberta Investment Panel video says is that investment decisions are made from Toronto and Ottawa. Now, when it comes to Ottawa, of course, that's where the legislation that actually determines what the contribution rates are and how it's to be, how the benefits are handled. They take care of the legislation. But Toronto is the finance capital of Canada. So is it possible that Toronto is trying to send a message to Ottawa that they just aren't hearing about economic opportunities for business investment in Canada?
Well, there are some smart freaking cookies in Toronto when it comes to finances. When you're moving up the finance chain in that industry, that's where you end up. So, definitely has a team of very highly intelligent people working on it. And whether or not they're trying to prompt Ottawa to make different decisions, I could not speak to that. I don't know. I know that the federal government definitely, sorry about that. I know that the government definitely sets up the legislation in terms of which direction investments are to go. For example, the CPP has some bits in there about DEI investing and green energy kind of investing. Okay, so they have a small portion that has to go towards that. Whether or not people in Toronto are for or against that, or have other industries that they want to promote or whatnot, they probably do it very collaboratively and make a strong case one way or the other and decide together. No one messes around too much when it comes to huge amounts of money like that in the finance industry.
This is a classic case of propaganda at work here. Where the decisions are made is inconsequential. And what I heard in that video was that the offices were located in Toronto and Ottawa. We don't know who was employed there. There very well could be a whole wagon load of chuck wagon load of Albertans working in Ottawa and Toronto. I think as a as it would be nice to have some type of outpost out in Alberta, reflective of the CPP. But at the end of the day, Vanessa, this doesn't matter. What matters is, are retirees in Alberta getting what it is they paid into? And the answer is yes. So who cares where these decisions are being made? Are you getting what you paid for? The answer is yes. And that's why most people in Alberta support the CPP. So I don't think this even matters, to be honest.
Well,
All
I would
right, go
take
ahead,
the.
Steve.
Go ahead, Steve.
No, Val can go. I'll wait till Val's points made.
I would disagree with you, Josh, on all of those points. To be honest, a lot of people in Alberta look at how much they put into CPP versus how much they get back. And the truth is that the maximum that you can get back from out of the CPP is capped. And that's the problem. And most people who contribute at the maximum don't receive, it's capped what they get back. So when you hear that Alberta sends more to the CPP than its seniors get in return, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a cap they put on a maximum that you can receive back, regardless of how much you've actually contributed. And since, as you pointed out, Albertans make a lot of money per person, and we contribute a lot, therefore, per person, we don't usually receive back. I don't think we've ever received back um, as much as we have contributed.
This would apply to every Canadian, not just Albertans. These rules apply to everybody. Now, Alberta is graced with a younger population. As I mentioned earlier, Albertans earn more than any other province. And what this means here is that essentially, if you have a problem with this cap, and in order to remedy this cap, you are going to create your own pension plan. Something we need to reckon with, of which has not been brought up in this here discussion so far, is the LifeWorks report. The LifeWorks report commissioned by Alberta's Treasury Board of Finance that was released in September 2023. This is a report that Daniel Smith had quoted extensively. Many people had put a lot of confidence in this report. Again, it's a blueprint for the Alberta pension plan. And in this blueprint, they had estimated that Alberta would be entitled to $334 billion. That Alberta, if they were to leave, would take 53% of CPP assets if it withdrew. Now, this was a comical number. Many economists thought this was simply absurd. And this was reinforced by Canada's chief actuary officer, who released a paper on this in December of past year, December 2024. And what he said was that the LifeWorks reports, this estimation of 53% is grossly inflated, and Alberta would be looking at approximately 20 to 25%. Approximately. Again, the federal minister would get the final say. So what does this mean? It means that in order to satisfy the cap of which Val is discussing here, that more than likely the rates in Alberta, in an Alberta pension plan, would have to go up. Why? Because you don't have enough assets. That is a distinct possibility, that if you have your own pension plan, it is vulnerable to investment risk, it's vulnerable to demographics, it's vulnerable to a variety of other factors, and ultimately this could lead to a higher rate, as we are seeing in Quebec right now, who has their own pension plan, and they're an aging population. So we have to not just miss the trees for the forest here, that this cap is necessary for a variety of reasons, and creating your own pension plan could open up a whole lot more issues in order to just satisfy this cap.
Can I butt in here, Val? I guess I will. The problem with Alberta's problem and what Val stated about the inequities is that there's going to be inequities in a provincial plan too. There's going to be people paying more than getting back all the time. And sure, it might be easier to control that in a smaller population. But this is why it should just be up to the individual. But I know that's no point going there because it's not going to happen in the context of what we're discussing today. So back to what Val was saying, it's very tribal to care that Alberta is not getting back what they put in. Like, I don't care about that. I care about, am I going to get back what I put in? I am the individual. Like, that's what people in this whole country keep missing. It's not about what province you reside in or anything. It's just what the money that you earn, that is your life. You're taking time out of your life to earn that, and they take it away to give it to, and then going to say they're going to give it back to you when you're older, and you're not even guaranteed to get there. So I don't care what Alberta gets back. I don't care what Ontario gets back. I care about what I get back. And that's what everybody should care about, what I get back. Not me personally, but when they're talking to themselves.
Go ahead, Val.
Couple of things to point out here. The biggest issue and the reason there's so much controversy over how much Alberta could potentially withdraw from the CPP is because when the CPP was actually written, it was poorly worded in terms of how that formula and calculation would go in terms of what a province could receive or withdraw. And if you actually follow the actual written words of how it is in that legislation, the number actually comes out closer to something like 636 billion. Okay. So what the LifeWorks people did was they said, well, it obviously would not work that way. So we're going to take into account additional factors such as administrative costs and payouts, and they accounted for a whole bunch of other additional items to add to the formula so that it would be a more fair representation of what Alberta could potentially claim. Now, do I think that the $334 billion is an accurate number? No, I do not. I think it's when you go into a negotiation, you put your highest number out there and you negotiate from there. Alberta was the first one at the table bringing up this issue, so that's what you do. It's a negotiating tactic. Is it probably closer to 150 million? Yes, or billion rather, and that's what was reflected in the video that we listened to earlier on the Alberta Next Panel. Now, in terms of whether or not something is going to be capped or every person is going to receive more or less, I mean, the Alberta Pension Plan is talking about either increasing its benefits to seniors or reducing the actual contribution rate, so that that cap is not an imposition to people. It's not a hard stop. That is what most people have an issue with, not just in Alberta, but in Canada with the Canada Pension Plan, is that cap. Because you're right, there are other provinces that contribute more than they receive back. And that's a very key issue that most people have with the pension plan. So could be different with an Alberta pension plan. It has to follow, it has to follow the return rates and kind of the setup that the CPP has. That's in federal legislation, but it gives it a lot of maneuverability to have additional policies or additional contribution or different programs to either receive more back or lower contribution amounts. So there's flexibility in there that we're not talking about.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I think it's important to realize too that we're talking about a bureaucracy here, and you can call me a cynic, but the last thing that the Canadian Pension Plan is concerned about, and the last thing that the Alberta Provincial Pension Plan will be concerned about, is your retirement. Their number one goal was to keep themselves employed, and whether or not that means better returns for you, they don't care. And that's the problem with every social program out there. Whether it's healthcare, pensions, whatever else has it, the bureaucracy, who's ever running it, they're mostly concerned with their own well-being for that day.
Well, and that's just it. Josh mentioned the LifeWorks report, and he's correct in the report itself. It mentioned 350 billion. The chief actuary said it would be 140. It would be more realistic. Of course, an actuary is someone who uses mathematics, statistics, and financial theory to analyze and manage risks and uncertainties, and that's primarily in the insurance and finance sectors. So, for those people who may have been unfamiliar with that. So I want to get to the next part of the equation here, because one of the sales points was that if Alberta would be able to withdraw, if they had their own pension plan, withdraw and reject net zero and DEI-based investment ideology. And I have a question for you about that, which is, how much balance should there be between rejecting on the basis of ideology versus the need to recognize an opportunity in the market? I just want to get some initial thoughts out of you on that, and I'll bring up why that is in a minute here.
Well, there's a case to be made both ways, right? So if you're talking about diversity and inclusion, I actually don't have a case for that part, but I do in terms of like the climate change initiatives. Okay, so investing in areas that have climate change initiatives and good programs and research and development can certainly help promote that, and that's not a bad thing. But at the same time, it's also a province that kind of tends to move the other direction, where oil and gas and carbon emissions exist, right? So you don't want to promote too heavily into something that's going to actually block, progress. So I suppose it would be up to, if you're looking at it knowledgeably and investing in those types of initiatives, knowing where the outcome will benefit the province.
Alberta is crawling with woke NDP leftists too. It won't be long, and they'll be wanting to do the same things. And my sister works for Alberta Health Services, and she says just crawling with liberals, socialists, whatever you want to call it. So it won't be long, and it'll be the same thing.
I see Kat down there and MJ kind of giving me the thumbs down on that opinion, and I would welcome you to come up and discuss at our discussion point, because I'm interested in knowing your opinion at when we get to that point, please.
Well, I think we've introduced another piece of the puzzle here. The old saying is go woke, go broke. And that seems to be somewhat of a law in a certain sense. And this opens up one of the issues that the Alberta pension plan would encounter, because it's by and large, the success of a plan is by and large determined by the youth or the amount of people that are working in your province. And we know that Alberta is blessed with people who make more money than anybody else in any other province. They have a significant investments in pretty big companies there. And they also have a very young population. If Alberta were to have their own pension plan, and let's say a good portion of Alberta's economy is surrounding oil, as we know, but it's diversified. There's a diverse economy in Alberta. And if the trends continue where the oil of which Alberta has, which is my understanding, is not the best. I don't know. But some say shale might be better. I don't know. And investment in that industry over a period of time continues to decline, then will Albertans be making as much money as they are making now? Probably not, because those are high paying jobs. And also, there is this effect that by Alberta creating their own pension plan, and let's say conservatively, they take out $140 billion out of the CPP, that would have an effect on Canadians writ large. And it would be interesting to see what the retaliation would be from other provinces untoward Alberta in the event that Alberta's pension plan harms Canadians, let's say, writ large. So there are quite a lot of facets here to look at, Vanessa, when you're talking about making investments in certain companies and not others, and what's the right investment, what's an ethical investment, et cetera, et cetera. By and large, the trend for investment quite possibly would say that oil or things of this nature is going down. And if it's going down, then that means Albertans are going to make less, and that's going to impact the APP moving forward.
Yeah, I think you made an awesome point, Josh. And you have to understand what's going on right now. That most of the oil that Alberta produces is being sold to the United States, and the United States is trying to get off of Alberta oil and produce more of their own. And that's going to take about 15 years to reconfigure the refineries in the Midwest to refine the lighter oil in the WTI, which is the Texas oil, which is better oil. By the way, the Alberta oil is what the worst on the market, the dirtiest. That's why it's the cheapest. It's not just because of logistics, although that is part of the reason. But you got to consider that, and then you got to consider that there's the likelihood of getting a pipeline across British Columbia to the ocean still isn't going to happen anytime soon. And in 15 years, the whole world could change, and we don't even know how much oil the rest of the world's going to need, especially the dirtiest oil out there. And that's 15 more years, by the way, for the other countries to switch to Texas and buying more of American oil. So it could totally backfire the Alberta pension plan. It is. I've said it many times, but I'll say it again. Like, they think the world is never going to change, and that's just like the Canadian founding. And they didn't leave any kind of. And it's not like the United States Constitution that was open for new territories to become states and to have equal representation. It's whatever Alberta is doing is just as short-sighted as the founding of Canada. So it's kind of interesting to see it mirror what it claims to oppose all the time.
Go ahead, Bill.
Steve does have a good point. It would be a little bit more of a volatile plan, but don't forget that oil and gas is not the only thing that is in Alberta, and that the investments that Alberta chooses, while it might have something similar to Quebec, like 20% or something invested within Alberta, it would still have investments elsewhere. So if financial hard times came for Alberta, that could easily be adjusted, much easier to adjust what is invested in within in a province than it is to change the entire CPP investment. So let's look at it that way as well. There's ways to mitigate that.
Okay, so I'm going to have one final question here, and then we're going to open it up to the room because I see we have some people that are super keen to have a chat about this. But my final question to you is, when it comes to the proposal of an Alberta pension plan, do you believe it's being proposed from a standpoint of legacy or ambition?
Well, I think it would be a little bit of both. This, to me, is a pet project of Stephen Harper. But in reality, it actually goes back to the 1960s when this conversation was going on. There are citations related to Albertan MLAs talking about creating their own pension plan at that time. And naturally, that conversation would come up because Quebec was talking about it as well. So this has kind of been in the ether for a long time. And I would say Stephen Harper's firewall letter kind of cemented it. And what we've seen with successive premiers, Klein, Notley, Kenny, now Smith, is the carrying of the torch of this ideology that Stephen Harper put in writing and handed to Ralph Klein in 2001. So it is a legacy in that respect. And I don't think a lot of younger Albertans identify with the rhetoric or the idea as much as the baby boomers within Alberta. Commonly, I'll hear baby boomer Gen X Albertans vehemently defend sovereignty. Very rarely will I ever hear a young person kind of have the same type of intensity. Could be wrong. That's just anecdotal. Now, in terms of it being ambitious, well, it's part of the sovereignty initiative writ large. The Alberta Next Panel is discussing sovereignty, and this year's one of the issues of which would have to be reckoned with if Alberta were to become sovereign. They would have to create their own pension plan if they so choose. And again, as I've briefly stated, Alberta having their own pension plan would invite a lot of risk and volatility. There's no guarantee that they would be making great investments. There's no guarantee that Alberta's population will remain as young as it is, assuming that immigration levels remain. I think they're ranked third in terms of immigration right now. If they can keep up those levels by bringing in immigrants from, let's say, India or China, whatever it may be, in order to just funnel it in to kind of keep the population young, that would weather quite possibly the volatility associated with that. Alberta's fertility rate is high in comparison to other provinces, but I think right now it's 1.4. So that means there's more deaths occurring than births. So that's below replacement. And then also you would have the volatility associated with how much assets Alberta is going to be receiving from the CPP. And you'll note that in their video there, and Daniel Smith is on record saying this, that this idea, we can't move forward on this idea unless we have an exact figure in relation to the assets of which ultimately the Minister of Finance would rule on, more or less, and then it would go to Supreme Court. So in terms of, it's highly ambitious. It's highly ambitious because you're dealing with something that's dependable, that's trusted, that's growing, and you're going to divorce yourself from that for something that is inherently volatile. So it's both ambitious and legacy.
Okay, Steve,
Yeah,
what are your thoughts?
Yeah, what Josh touched on there is more reasons why Alberta should not have its own pension plan. Why are we bringing in immigrants to fund a pension plan? I mean, that's nonsense. If so, we're going to bring in people who don't assimilate to our country, replace our unskilled labor, which most of it is, so our youth can't get jobs just so a pension plan or fund can continue to be profitable. People can keep paying into it. So that just reinforces what I said earlier, is that Alberta, this is the last thing Alberta should do. And I know we're going to get to them having control over their immigration, another show in a few weeks from now. So we'll leave it there. But if they do have more control of immigration, then keep the pension plan out of it and let the rest of the country import their replacements to fund their pension plan.
So I think, personally, I think it definitely has to do with ambition. Albertans usually have a pretty high sense of ambition, and I think it is an ambitious idea in general. But I do think there's something to be said about the legacy part, because we will have an elderly or older generation retiring here as well, right? So that's an ongoing factor. And in terms of Alberta independence, then, I mean, who knows how many um, people here now choose not to retire in Alberta and go elsewhere. Whereas if Alberta became independent, I don't think that that's an easy option to do. We can still port it over, so on and so forth, but perhaps it's more likely that they might retire here, especially given what might actually happen between Alberta and Canada during negotiations, and when tensions get high, who knows, right? So I'm just considering that. There's also something to be said about the fact that that pension fund is controlled by the federal government, and everyone's trust throughout Canada is not exactly the highest in our federal government right now. So there's a level of control that's given away to an entity that you don't know what their intentions might be in the future. How that pension money or a CPP might be used against Alberta in the future in various ways. Who knows? Nothing surprises me with this federal government anymore. So there's a certain level of autonomy and control that comes with taking the money that we're saving here in Alberta for Alberta retirement and keeping it in Alberta and helping fund our institutions here that, would have an impact over many, many years. So there's a legacy part of that as well, I believe.
All right. Well, I mean, listen, it's been great getting your thoughts on this. I do want to open it up the room to let other people come up, because I've been seeing hands waving and stuff like that. We gotta finish our panel discussion first. But Val, I'm going to make you co-host if you're all right with that.
Sounds good.
And then we can get on to opening this up to the room here and see get the impressions from people who've been listening in this evening, because I think that's incredibly important. Actually, it's one thing for us to talk amongst ourselves, but having feedback from others is we might come up with some views that we didn't anticipate. So
Hey,
good
MJ.
evening, MJ.
Good evening. I have a question. What right does Alberta have to other people's money? I mean, it may have been people that have worked and lived in Alberta at some point in time that have put money into this pension plan, but they're going to be going, what, taking money out for people that have put money in while they lived and worked in Alberta, and then control that after they've left Alberta and moved elsewhere? I mean, it's not the province's money, it's the people's money that put in. And many of them might have worked and lived in Alberta, but they might have moved on. So does Alberta get the kick at the can to go and control that money for people that have just gone to work there for a couple years, then left?
Well, consider it like the Quebec pension plan, where you could go move to Quebec, work there for a bit, and then go elsewhere. There's a certain amount of portability with the Quebec pension plan that the Alberta pension plan is looking to also incorporate into its own. So it's not the federal government's money. You're right. It's the people who spent time in Alberta, working in Alberta, and so therefore they should be entitled to an Alberta pension plan amount. So I don't think that they're exactly taking someone else's money when you think of it that way.
Okay, but the other thing is when I hear about Alberta talking about wanting sovereignty and independence, basically they're saying they want to take all the programs that were made by the federal government with them instead of starting fresh, brand new, and saying, yeah, you put money in over there and you put money in over there, but you can put it in over here.
I mean, that's true, but you wouldn't want to do a full, complete, clean slate wipe of an entire country right at the beginning. You take what you already have and you slowly introduce or modify or change the systems that you want to do over time to not, have massive culture shock for everyone, right? Like that's not the goal. The goal isn't to uproot everyone from everything they know. The goal is to enjoy what we have now because there are a lot of systems that do work and people do like and just improve on them. And if some of those items do need complete reform, then so be it. Like perhaps Alberta would have referendums on these items and everyone's vote would actually matter.
Well, that is part of the point of the survey, though, isn't it? Is to try and get the feedback from Albertans. That's why they're having these panel discussions all around the province.
I think when Alberta says they're going to get back what they put into the CPP, they do mean who's ever residing in Alberta and wherever else they may be right now. That the message to them is that you shouldn't be afraid of losing everything you put into it.
Well, and that brings back the question of the domino effect. If Alberta were to decide that they wanted to pursue a pension plan, if that was how the feedback survey results wound up falling at that point in time, is there going to be a rush by other provinces to then potentially consider starting up their own pension plans in order to not miss out, so to speak? It's the fear of missing out. What do you think about that?
Ideally, every province should have their own provincial plan that they can custom tailor so that the benefits they receive reflect their economy and their costs of living, and the ability to invest in what makes sense for that province, in my opinion. But that's being very idealistic, because that's not how the current system works right now.
Well, there is amount of universality built into it in some ways, and that has to do with at the beginning of our confederation, of course, there were disparate ways of distributing social welfare assistance, so to speak. So this was kind of a one size fits all, and which winds up perhaps being a little bit one size fits none, maybe. But that is one of the reasons why it kind of was set up that way. So the question, I guess, would be then: is it really universal at that point in time if provinces are able to dictate how, when, what kind of contributions, what kind of benefits you receive, and so on? And would that then create a bit of competition in the market, so to speak, for people to move? In other words, move where they're going to be, best taken care of. I don't know. Is that something that we need to be considering?
Exactly, exactly. Here's another interesting conundrum that I don't think anyone's really thinking about. If Alberta takes a portion of money, regardless of how much, just a big chunk of it, then the remaining Canadian pension plan will have to adjust its rates in order to make up for the difference. So for the rest of Canada, most of their rates will go up. But it's built right into the federal legislation that any provincial plan also has to follow a similar contribution rate to the Canada Pension Plan. So if Alberta withdraws its money and says, okay, well, look, we can have XYZ rates and we'll just make it comparable with whatever programs they try and do. And but then the Canada Pension Plan has to increase rates. Well, does Alberta then have to also increase rates? Are we just making it more expensive for everybody in Canada by increasing rates if Alberta withdraws that money?
It's entirely possible, Val. I mentioned this earlier. That this, as Daniel Smith had put in this Alberta Next Panel video that we listened off the top, I think the term used there was Alberta or Ottawa attacking Alberta's economy. And I think Ottawa, maybe Canada writ large, the aside of Quebec, would interpret this action as being a form of aggression. And as I mentioned, it would be met with some form of response, whether it be, okay, let's say sovereignty happens, you're landlocked, you're your own country. Yeah, I would expect that various, it would even out in a sense. The provinces would retaliate given what Alberta would have done in this hypothetical situation.
Right, and even not even taking into account the independence part, just the withdrawal from the CPP. I mean, I can guarantee you there will be a legal battle over the formula of what amount gets withdrawn. And then, okay, an amount is decided, and you can be sure that the federal government will then be like, well, maybe we'll be a little bit more critical about what projects we approve of in Alberta, and we're not going to take into consideration, even more so than they already do, we won't take into consideration some of the other projects in completely different fields and industries. And who knows if that'll impact how they treat Alberta, right? So it's it's a little unfortunate that we live in a country where it's Alberta versus the federal government from my standpoint in Alberta. It's never supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be how do we coordinate for the best of everyone? But we end up in this situation where it doesn't seem like that and it doesn't seem to go that way.
Well, this doesn't have to be, this pension suggestion does not have to be in Alberta versus the federal government. In this situation, Albertans benefit greatly from the CPP. There's no guarantees when it comes to an APP. And the points that this video brings forth, I think there's a lot of opportunity for solution-based discussions. All right, so Alberta bemoans the fact that Toronto and Ottawa have a CPP office. Let's set one up over there. Okay, Alberta or Daniel Smith is bemoaning the fact that 12% of the CPP is invested elsewhere, and we need our own pension plan so we can invest in what it is we want. Okay, well, let's just work it out with the CPP who makes these decisions and say a certain percentage has to be invested in Alberta. Like, there's a lot of solutions here that could come out of this, I think, for Alberta, and maybe that's the whole gamut here.
Well, it's incredibly difficult to change how the CPP runs and functions. You have to get a two-thirds consensus of all the provinces. And that's one major problem, actually. It's good in a way because it protects the CPP, but in the other sense, like it was very difficult for them in 2016 to change how the CPP worked even then. And it was the only time it's ever changed from its founding in 1965 or 66. So some of those solutions are possible, but are they likely? No.
I don't think there's one provincial government that would frown upon the CPP investing in their province more than it already does. I think that's everybody could agree on that. And if that's the impetus to open up reform, then let's do it.
Well, this is the thing. When we're talking about reform, it does appear to be that there is a consistent inability to future plan when it comes to Canada in general. For instance, the Constitution. I mean, there was only 4 provinces at the time, and now, of course, we found out that there's some discrepancies, and this is actually one of the things that's fueling the Alberta separatist movement in general. This disparity between other provinces and the very large eastern provinces, and similar again. If we look at the Canada Pension Plan, which was created in 1965, Quebec opted out. They said, no, thank you. We want to create our own. It is technically in provincial jurisdiction. It does appear to be that there is a failure to plan for what happens if another province decides to exit at some future, much later date. Now, in this case, we're talking 60 years later, but I mean, they could not anticipate that this equation might come up. That's why it's not clear in the legislation on how there would be an exit. So, I mean, how do we address these issues of failure to plan and future proofing Canada and these various issues?
306, you've been up here for a little bit. Did you have something you wanted to add?
I literally only just popped up, but MJ had his hand, and Vanessa asked her question, so I'll just hold off until that's resolved.
The floor
Go
is
ahead,
yours,
MJ.
I've been thinking about the whole thing of how do you reform this country in of itself, and that's a tall conversation. I mean, I've looked at the idea of Senate reform and going with an elected Senate, and yeah, I mean, that would be the biggest conversation piece. The only way I can truly see any conversation about, like, saying opening up this current constitution, opening up the Senate, making it elected, you'd have to guarantee Ontario more seats.
There's no reform in Canada.
But as it relates to this issue in particular, I don't believe that you would have to amend the Constitution in order to make amendments to the CPP. Is that the case, Vanessa
No.
and Val?
You actually do
No.
have to amend it if Alberta withdraws in terms of the formula.
But the CPP in isolation, if we wanted to make a reform to it, we wouldn't have to make a reform to the Constitution of Canada, correct?
No, we wouldn't have to do a reform to the Constitution of Canada for this. This is specific legislation that governs how the CBP and Quebec are to function. So, but however, Val is correct. In order to be able to do these reforms, there was one actually done in 1996 where they had to address the issue of there being insufficient contributions at the time. The plan was originally, they had figured it would run out by 2015 if they didn't make some major adjustments. That's why that was done in 1996. And actually, I put the link up to that in the nest up there. However, there is, as Val pointed out, there has to be a 2/3 agreement between the provinces, and of course, talking with the federal government about doing any major updates to it. So there is that. And if Alberta was to withdraw, they have 3 years, by the way, to start up a new pension plan on their end. Go ahead, MJ.
Sorry, I got interrupted when I was in the middle of speaking. It's like when I was talking about the idea of the Senate reforms, the only way you'd actually be able to get is to bribe the eastern provinces and to be able to get what the western provinces want, right? This is where we're at with all of this. Ontario would have to be guaranteed more seats in the Senate. The 4 provinces in the east would have to be guaranteed Senate more seats, and the Quebec could have to be guaranteed at least their 24, right? And then the provinces on the west get at least 10 seats and then adjusted by population. Because the only way you could go and guarantee a change in this country is by bribing the provinces to go and do that. But the federal government isn't wanting to go and fix that formula. But if enough provinces start bitching, they might go and actually take a very big consideration, right? I mean, right now it's just Alberta saying, fuck, we want out. They're not saying, trying to get the rest of the provinces together to say, hey, maybe it's time to reform this thing.
Well, interesting you bring that up, because if Alberta did hold a referendum, which is required in this province in order to have an Alberta pension plan, we have to do a referendum first. If that passed, there is no veto on it. The federal government cannot say, no, Alberta, you don't get a pension plan. They can't do that. So they would be forced to actually look at the writing in the CPP Act in order to determine what that formula is. So they would be forced to actually look at that and reform it and word it better and get the agreement of provinces. So it is one way of actually getting the federal government to take a look at our very interestingly worded Canada pension plan and update it. Like we need some updates in there. We can't just leave it as the base, 1966, or the small adjustments they did in 1996. Thanks for the correction on that, Vanessa. It does need to be updated anyways, so they would be forced to do so.
I do find it very curious that 2 subjects in a row, removing the RCMP and removing the CPP, both were cited in Stephen Harper's firewall letter. I do wonder where Stephen Harper stands on this issue today. I am curious to see what he's up to, what he's writing about. I think it is very interesting. It's Stephen Harper's firewall letter that is at the root of two issues in a row. I'll be looking for this in the third, fourth, and fifth. But I do wonder what's he up to?
Yeah, there might be some dots to connect there for sure. But don't look too hard into it. Although he may have been, a conservative, Alberta's issues not necessarily with a particular party. There just happens to be one party that's more aligned with us. But issues exist on both sides. So
Here's one dot that I would connect for you, Val. I think Pierre Poilievre is running in a by-election out in Alberta. And if I'm not mistaken, he's he's a disciple of Harper. I mean, that's my understanding anyways. So yeah, I mean, Harper is coming back through Pierre Poilievre. He's coming back to Alberta. You could look at it like that.
I mean, his by-election with Pierre here definitely throws an interesting curveball for what will happen in the future. That's a guarantee.
Well, actually, as far as Stephen Harper goes, he was made, if I remember correctly, chairman of the board of AIMCO, which is the company that looks after the public sector pensions. So he's not too far removed from this subject. MJ, you've got your hand up.
I was wondering, was the conversation in this firewall letter? Did he also mention taking control of the province's income tax? I haven't read it. So.
Yeah. Stay tuned to next week. We will continue with this firewall letter expose, I suppose. But I did. 306 Shane had his hand up, and he hasn't spoken yet. 306. I've seen you've been in the audience for a lot of this discussion. I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say on the subject matter.
Lots going on, lots to discuss. I guess full transparency, Vanessa and I've been back and forth in messages and whatnot on the subject, covering a lot of ground. So she's pretty much familiar with everything that I've, think and everything I've had to say about it. Took some notes throughout, what's kind of been discussed, and then just sort of added my own stuff. So I apologize if I speak for a little bit here, but, here's everything that I've got. Firstly, addressing Alberta's video that they made, one point that I thought was odd that they, bring up as kind of like a fear tactic almost. It's weird to me, but anyways. Quebec and the federal government have already created precedent with respect to the portability rule. Quebec created their Quebec pension plan, and it works in that portability thing with the Canadian pension plan. So the fear tactic that the Alberta government mentioned in the video regarding, well, they might not let us have the portability thing, to me just seems to be somewhat misplaced and misstated, considering the fact that precedent already exists with respect to another province. So I would assume by, just legal doctrine that would then have to apply with Alberta. Josh, you mentioned something earlier that, if Alberta goes and does their pension plan, then, by fiat or, whatever necessity, they then have to go independent. And I guess I'd point out the fact that Quebec has a pension plan and isn't separate. So an Alberta pension plan doesn't necessarily require that independence happen. It's an emboldening step towards it, but it doesn't suddenly require that it does happen. I say LMAO at the idea of CPP being both trusted and stable. The head of the CPP is appointed by the Minister of Finance, so the philosophy is at least somewhat influenced by the politics of the day. And yeah, it's an arm's length organization, and I have oceanfront property in Saskatchewan to sell you. Comparing the numbers, Quebec's population is 9 million. And their pension fund is valued at $424 billion, and their operating costs are $2 billion. Canada's population, less Quebec, is 32 million, and their pension fund is valued at $714 billion. CPP operating costs are $6 billion. Quebec's pension is worth 60% of the value of the Canadian pension fund, while they have only 22% of Canada's population. So just on those numbers alone, I think it's fair to say that Canada's pension plan has, to me anyways, ridiculous operating costs. They're inefficient. And if Quebec, again, 22% of Canada's population, has managed to amass 60% of the value that Canada has for its pension fund for the entire country, then we're not investing as smartly as we could be. We just basically need to duplicate the investments that Quebec is making, and Canada would be therefore that much richer simply by, the result of the investments that Quebec has made. Quebec is invested inside their domestic borders at a rate of 20% of the value of the fund and 10% within the rest of the country. Canada's pension fund is only invested to 12% within our country. And to me, Value said that that's, significantly high or whatever else. And I don't know finance, so I'll take your word for it, given your personal experience. But to me, it's paltry, it's pathetic, it's nothing. This sends a signal to the rest of the world that there is a lack of trust or faith in investing domestically, which can basically lead to private investment shying away. If your own government won't invest in you, why the fuck should someone else? A large-scale pension plan program should be used to invest more heavily domestically with the intent that the virtuous economic cycle takes effect. More investment leads to more jobs produce more wealth from those jobs equals more contributions, which then fuels more investment and so on. This is about stabilizing and investing in the future. We need to stop thinking in 4, so that's your next election, 5, that's your bond cycle, 10-year bond cycle. We need to stop thinking in those short-term cycles and begin thinking in 50-year and 100-year increments. This might necessitate either higher premiums or lower payouts in the short term, but with broader domestic investment, you fuel the potential for broader prosperity within your borders.
Well, if the pension plan is about funding industries, then it's even worse than I thought. If they're concerned with the prosperity of the nation, they should keep the money in the hands of individuals and entrepreneurs and innovative people. So that's all I have to say on that.
Well, the point that a pension plan should very much be forward thinking, I think we could all agree on that. And that is the inherent problem with Alberta setting up their own provincial plan at this time, in that they're not getting any younger. The only way to remain younger, keep the workforce stable, not the only way, but a prime way would be to keep your population young. More baby boomers are retiring in Alberta. That's less productivity, and that's more being taken out of the CPP at this time. And the risks associated with CPP, or just a pension plan in general, with respect to investing, an Alberta pension plan would be susceptible to that, in that if you are thinking for the future, you have to ask, is an Alberta pension plan the most future-oriented, safe bet for a young person today? And the answer would be no. The answer would be no, as you mentioned. Operating costs are one thing, but to say that it's not delivering, I mean, Vanessa had recited the number associated with growth since, 1996, whatever that stat was. But ultimately, we're at $714 billion right now. And that is, Vanessa, you'll have to pull up the stats. Like, that should cover us for a long time. We never really got into the details of how stable the CPP is. I hear your point. I haven't, in this discussion, and me personally, I haven't directed my absolute attention to the CPP. So there could be some deficits here. But ultimately, an Alberta pension plan would be vulnerable to economic problems, as we mentioned with the oil industry, fertility problems and immigration problems, investment problems. So if you are young right now, living in Alberta, you want as much stability as possible moving forward. And if, a stable pension is something you can, at the bare minimum our society can offer, then we should do that. We should not trifle with it. It's just stable. So That's my point there, 306. But I've heard a lot of what you said there, and there's a lot of correct reasoning, I would say.
Val, I'm just going to
But
step.
you missed. I'm very sorry, Vanessa. I just have to. But Josh, you missed one very crucial thing in your praising and bowing at the altar of the $714 billion that the CPP has. A province with only 20% of Canada's population has amassed by themselves a fund worth 60% of what all the rest of the other 80% has amassed. So again, just by the numbers there, it's clear to me, it's clear to say that the Canada Pension Plan, by just the straight across the board comparison, is an abject failure by, again, just straight comparison.
There you go. That's extreme. To say it's an abject failure when it can cover Canadians for the next 70 to 80 years guaranteed, to say it's a failure, that's, I would say, what is your metric? Like, you're doing a comparison here between two variables that have absolute surplus. So what more would you want from the CPP than it hasn't already achieved? I mean, it's 714 billion. We'll pull up the numbers that will cover every Canadian for the foreseeable future. The formula is stable, so it's not an abject failure. It's a resounding success.
I just want to. Sorry, Val. I just want to quickly step in here, and because Josh asked about the numbers. Back in 1996, the Canada Pension Plan was valued at $50 billion. In 2006, they went to an active investment strategy rather than relying on government bonds, and that's why we've seen the growth that we have to 714 and change billion today. So go ahead, Val.
I would encourage you, Josh, to look at the Canadian pension plan in terms of if it was doing so well, why did they have to increase the rate of contribution and not just adjust what they're invested in to get better returns? Because there are other pensions in the world that do better. And I would challenge you to go look at the forecast for what the rates of contribution to the CPP will be in the next 40 years, because they're going up and they will continue to go up. So, I mean, you have more people in Canada. We're making more money. I know it seems like hard times now, but that is true. GDP is not, stagnant or decreasing. It's getting there, but CPP rates still have to go up. And I mean,
Okay. About those increases, depending on the percentage points, we need to know what the dollar increase was for the average Canadian. So when you talk about this rate increase, the effect on the average Canadian writ large is nominal. But over a period of time, I would say it increases. But like Vanessa had mentioned in her article, the CPP hadn't raised its rates for 16 years. So it was that efficient. They've raised their rates. Everything is going up, inflation, these types of things. But in terms of where our pension plan stacks up in the world, you said there's a handful of countries that are doing better. I mean, what difference does it make if we rank in the top 10? Yeah, pension plans in the world. I think the CPP, we're in the top 10. I'm gonna hazard a guess here. We would be in the top 10. If we're top 10 in the world, and you want it to be better, you're kind of being unreasonable here.
well, semantics, Josh. I said one of the best pension plans out there, not versus pension plans of the country. So if you're comparing pension plans in general, it's not so
I think people
fantastic.
Oh, sorry, Val. I thought you were done.
That's okay. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah. Well, I think people are missing the point here. So Josh is incorrect in saying it's success. The failure is immeasurable, because what the pension plan is doing, and what all pensions plan do, even in the States, they're stealing money from the youth, where people are in their prime. No, not youth like kids, but they're young adults when they're in their prime, where they could use that money to go fund some innovation project that they might have, and we have no idea what it is. That's why it's called individual liberty. Elon Musk wanted to build rockets. I never thought about building rockets once in my life. So, and what we're doing with that money, we're giving it to old people on their way out the door, and they're just sitting around doing nothing with it but just living. That money is much better off in the hands of the young for them to fund it do what they want with it, and we don't know what they're going to produce with it.
Well, that's consistent.
So it's a
That's
complete
consistent.
failure.
That's consistent with your view of how governance ought to be administered. So this would be classified as a socialist program. So we are a socialist country
100%.
in a variety of ways. So you're being consistent with your baseline ideology and faith within the American Constitution, because the American solution would be in tow with yours. So I see where you're coming from.
I'd have to give you a little bit of a
Thank you, Josh.
pushback on that, Steve, because don't forget, and Vanessa wrote a really great column about this, don't forget what the pension plan was actually designed to do. And if you take it away, and yeah, you have more money in the hands of younger individuals who can go out and put it into the economy and build stuff, but you still have an older population that now can't survive, need to move back in with their grandkids or children and become a burden on the family unit in general.
No, I understand like it's impossible to get rid of now. You'd have to phase it out slowly, and it would take a very long time. But my point I was trying to make is rebuttal to Josh saying that the pension plan is a success, because we don't know if it's a success, because we don't know what individual could have done with that money if he or she could have kept it when they were younger, and who knows what they could have made. Like, that's what we don't know. That's what I was addressing.
Could I ask Shane a question? Shane, in Saskatchewan, let's say Saskatchewan were to pursue independence, would your ideal Saskatchewan involve a pension plan or not involve one?
Basically, Josh, to just provide you a simple blanket answer, take a look at Quebec and anything that Quebec has that no other province has. And if you think that thing, that program, that whatever, makes it either separate or independent from Ottawa, then control, find, replace Quebec, slap Saskatchewan in there, and Saskatchewan should have it.
So the answer is yes, you would have a pension plan?
Pension plan, provincial police service, collect our own tax, everything.
Like a good socialist.
It's not socialist. What?
Oh, it's 100% socialist. And this is the problem that I brought up earlier. They're just balkanizing the country. It's the complete opposite direction that we need to go in as a country. And I agree with the police forces for sure, because that people have the justice system from Ottawa is just terrible. We're slapping people on the wrist and letting them back out. But I said that last week. But for everybody to be totally balkanized and think that they're their own kind of people, that's what's so ridiculous to me. Is like, we're not our own people. Like, no province is its own ethnicity, but they act like they are, and it's the whole country to me is just completely ridiculous. And that's why I say it's unreformable, because everybody's against each other. They've made enemies out of enemies, and they think they're all allies within their own province, but there are terrible people within your own province and who you don't want nothing to do with. And like, I really get a kick out of the Westerners who think that if they take over a government program, it's not susceptible to the same corruption. Just give it some time, and the AP Alberta pension plan will be just as wasteful, just as much abuse as any federal program, because that's what governments do. They're subject to human nature, and because they're made up of human beings, and they're going to be corrupt, and they're going to look out for themselves first over anything else, and anybody else.
You might be very right there, Steve, but here's the difference. I already, like you said, there are shitty people in Saskatchewan, there are shitty people in Alberta. So fine, let me just have to contend with the shitty people within my own border, not having to contend with both the shitty people in my border and the shitty people in Ottawa. One area, one group of shitty people is enough to deal with.
I would ask Val the same question. Val, in the ideal Alberta, would you have a pension plan or no pension plan?
I think earlier I stated that personally, I do not believe in a forced pension plan. However, I can't speak for all Albertans, and I do believe there's portions of the population that rely on a national style pension plan to survive. So I would not want to just automatically take that away or take away the choice of that. Perhaps more of along those lines. Maybe it can be a choice to opt in and opt out, right? Because there's many people who here don't believe in a forced pension plan and have the knowledge to be able to take that money and do other things with it or invest it themselves. I did want to ask Shane.
Okay.
You brought up do you have something to reply to that, Josh, or can I ask?
Oh
Shane
yeah,
something?
oh yeah. But you can ask Shane something, please.
You had brought up, like when you first started talking, the video, and correctly mentioned that one of the fears, I suppose, that they put into the video, maybe as a piece of propaganda, was that the portability factor that Quebec pension plan has might not be applied to the Alberta pension plan. And I would argue that while it might be something to put in there as, a potential pro or con because it makes the video great, but I would also press back and say, well, there is no legislation that says that the federal government has to implement that. And for Quebec, they got that deal. They were never part of the pension plan. And if we're going to encounter issues with the federal government, which I can likely see Alberta having these issues with the federal government on any aspect of anything, that the federal government would try and use that as a negotiating tactic in which the pension plan for Alberta would fail. Perhaps the federal government can influence the courts to say, well, no, we don't recognize it. We don't want to have this portability thing. Too bad, so sad, Alberta. And then guess what? I mean, if Alberta doesn't have the portability feature, that's a pretty key part of the Quebec pension plan and in general.
I mean, sure, and it'll come down to how you get things shooken out in court, and unfortunately in Canada, your judges are appointed by the Prime Minister. So sure, it might very well be a thing. I guess there is a part of me, whether it's idealistic and therefore naive or potentially incorrect, who's to say? But that precedent does, matter. That established behaviors, established conduct does ultimately win the day and inform how a judge is supposed to rule on a particular thing. So even though Quebec was never a part of the original program or whatever the case may be, there's still an existence of, okay, Quebec, you're a separate thing, or a separate program, but you have this agreement with the existing. It's not stated in legislation that once a province is in, you can't go out. So therefore, again, just by established legal behavior, in this case, it's not the fact that it has to be written into the law. It needs to be of how have the provinces, in this case Quebec, conducted themselves, and how did Canada conduct itself, and that informs how a judge is supposed to review this. So Quebec has conducted itself that their pension plan is separate and portable. Canada agreed with that. Canada continues to engage with that, assuming that it's both separate and portable. Therefore, they would have to accept and allow Alberta's to be separate and portable should Alberta set it up.
As let me intervene here. Oh, I think just to get back to what Shane said earlier. The problem, though, is when I said about the balkanization, is the problem with Canada, and is the central government is way too weak. That's Alberta's biggest problem. That's why they can't get oil to the coast, because BC is interrupting it. And where a strong central government should be able to just override all of that province's wishes and say, no, we got to get Alberta is our people. We have to get our industries to the coast. So whatever continues to keep the federal government weaker is what Alberta's problem is. They need a stronger government, actually, not a weaker one.
That's a fundamental misunderstanding of how things work there, Steve.
Okay, I do actually.
Well, then I suggest you go read some American history, Articles of Confederation, and the constitutional debates.
Guys, I'd like to. Ted's had his hand up for a while here, so I'd like to hear from him. And then Val, I have a question for you.
Actually, I can wait because I was cooking supper and I wanted to respond to Josh about. But no, keep going. I'll come back later.
Okay, Val, I have a question for you. Because part of the debate, as it was, that 306 and I were having earlier, pertained to how much investment percentage-wise Alberta should be looking at if there should be a minimum if they decide to have their own pension plan. Now, there's been some back and forth on this one as to whether or not that is something you should specifically legislate. As far as I know, there are no conditions written into the CPP investments, how it should be invested. In other words, there's no set minimum per se. Do you think that having that in an Alberta pension plan would be beneficial, or do you think that would be restrictive? You've got some finance background, so I'm kind of dying to hear what your opinion is on that.
So when you say percentage, do you mean like a percentage that would be invested in Alberta, or do you mean a percentage of the entire fund that would be needing to go towards investment?
In this particular case, I'm talking about a percentage specifically for if Alberta was to have a pension plan, delineating a specific investment amount that must be invested in the province of Alberta at the time in order to help the industry grow. Is it smart to have it preset in the governing literature, or is it too restrictive? May it cause unintended consequences?
Both, actually. So if it was up to me and I was looking at it, I would do a certain percentage, but I would keep it on the low end, right? Quebec's currently at 20% invested in Quebec, but they didn't start that way. So initially, you'd want certain portion to be for Alberta within Alberta, maybe 5% or 10%, and adjust from there. So maybe a mandatory amount of 5%, but then a recommended amount of, I don't know, 15 or 20%, and so there's some leeway in there, because what you end up having is, especially in a province like Alberta where things shift and the volatility is there, you want to have the ability to change and shift rapidly. So you don't want to have a huge amount that's just tied into something specific. So you are right. There's definitely some concern there, but it's also important that if it is going to be an Alberta pension plan, it has a certain amount in Alberta. So I would say probably on the lower end, to start something like a 5%, and then like a recommended amount that goes up to 15%, and that gives some leeway, and it makes sure that there's at least a minimum amount within Alberta. That's how I would set it up.
We have to keep in mind that it's the federal government that will be determining this structure, this pension plan itself. And to that end, this would be an example of the federal government having the necessary power to help Alberta save it from itself. Like Val had suggested, she's open to there being a pension plan in Alberta. Well, if you're open to opening up a pension plan, you do so out of the interests of Albertans. But if you're truly acting out of the interests of Albertans, you would keep the Canadian pension plan because it's stable, it's proven, and reliable. So, as a whole, I think the Canadian government is fairly powerful. But I know what you're saying, Steve, in terms of these big projects, something of this nature. I have to continue hearing your point out.
I have two questions for you, Josh. First one, why do you think the federal government would determine the structure of Alberta's pension plan? Because I understand it completely the opposite. And the second question, or it's more of a statement to something you said a little bit earlier in terms of looking at how volatile and how volatile this Alberta pension plan might be and how stable the Canadian pension plan might be. You were also talking about how Alberta might not be looking at the long-term goals and the long-term longevity of something like that. And I would push back on that and say, you know what? We can talk about risks, and maybe there's a downturn in the economy, and maybe there's an aging population. But you know what? You know what else is also possible? Well, maybe pipelines and projects get approved right away. Maybe there's a giant boom coming from Alberta. Maybe Alberta independence goes amazing, and there's just absolute economic boom that we could be taking advantage of in the start of a pension plan, similar to how Quebec did it. Like there's all those possibilities as well. So risk is definitely something we talk a lot about when it comes to money, but you can't just dismiss the opportunity that might also be there and might have equal possibility of being there.
Now, in reference to the federal government having control over the Pension Act of Alberta, if I'm not mistaken, Vanessa, does not the federal government have sway in how the Alberta pension plan would perform? Could you help me on this?
To the best of my knowledge, there is a great amount of arm's length in the same way that the federal government can't really dictate to CPP investments as to how they are to perform. Now, they can certainly put forward projects to CPP investments, for instance, and say, we'd like you to invest in this, but there is the ability for them to say, no, we don't think so. And that's necessary because if you think about some of the projects that our government is certainly angling us towards or would prefer us to angle our towards, we could be looking at potentially the investment draining away as some of these things have, of course, gone bankrupt in some instances. So, I mean, we have for instance, I think it was $8 million allocated to battery plant that was given over by the federal government, and that we've suffered some bankruptcies there in this whole forward EV looking project here. Imagine what they could do with pension money. So there has to be that arm's length. So there is not the ability for them to dictate per se how investments are to be done. Just that when they're doing the collection for the contributions and the disbursements, so that would be the paying out of the benefits, it has to be comparable across the board. Okay, it's a universal plan.
Okay, so a quick way, okay, granted, but there are tacit ways of which the federal government could influence the structure of this plan. One such way is the distribution of assets. So, you know, the finance minister, the prime minister, you know, in terms of how much assets they calculate, I think it'll be less than 140 billion, to be honest. I haven't read that report in detail, but I think it would be a lot less when it's all said and done. It could be zero. And that would affect rates in Alberta greatly because they would be starting off with nothing. So that would change the game entirely. A lot is dependent on that number. How much assets Alberta will get from CPP. I think it's probably less than 100 billion. And if it's less than 100 billion, then all of the stats would have to be reconfigured because Daniel Smith's original presupposition was 333 billion, maybe 35, 335 billion based on LifeWorks report of 52% payout. So they've been operating on that presumption up until December of last year, December 2024. So yeah, I think how the plan is constructed is largely influenced by that. So that's a way that the federal government could influence this process.
Okay, well, I want to hear from Ted and then 306. They've had their hands up for a little while here.
Hey, since Josh, you keep saying the CPP is so great. Like my old man, well, father's passed away already. He could barely survive on old age and CPP. My mother, same thing. I have to pay for her groceries, part of her power. You know, so how good is that CPP? It's garbage. It really is. And again, farmers all their life. She had to go to work, you know, when in the 80s when interest rates went stupid. But the CPP is not a good investment.
That could be the case, Ted. We were talking in terms of comparison. So we were comparing the revenue percentage, growth percentage of each independent CPP or pension plan. So what you're discussing there is the allocation of those funds, and I totally agree with you. Absolutely, yes, there needs to be more distribution. I agree.
So, and again, okay, good. At least we're on the same page. Steve and Val, I'm kind of on the same boat. It shouldn't be forced pension contributions, but you know, there's guys like my parents that they're too cheap to pay for a financial advisor, and they didn't have the knowledge to do it on their own, so that's what they relied on. So, unfortunately, yeah, it should be opt-in or out. It's up to you. and go from there. But great space. Thank you, Vanessa and Val 306, Josh and Steve. Great space.
So did the math to try and compare value versus relative population, and what, Josh, you're looking for. What am I saying it should have been? So you're, running around, throwing your arms up and dancing over 713 billion. If the CPP had been as successful as the Quebec pension plan based on the relative population and fund value, then the CPP currently today should be worth $1.506 trillion. Again, that's taking the value that the Quebec pension fund is at compared to its population, and then extrapolate the Canadian pension plan relative to its funding population, and how should it have been if, again, 9 million people produce 60% of 32 million people's value. So again, we're
Okay.
800. We're
Okay. So
800
let me ask
billion.
you.
We're
Yeah.
$800 billion short, buddy.
Okay. Yeah, I hear you. So let me ask you. Do you think an Alberta pension plan would outperform a Canadian pension plan if it was started in, let's say, the next, let's give you grace and say 10 years, but I could ask you in the next 5 years how this would work out. But yeah, that's the question. Would an Alberta pension plan outperform a Canadian pension plan?
I have no idea, but my philosophy about it is completely different to what its current philosophy is. So I couldn't say how successful monetarily it would be, because again, in my personal opinion, it needs to be invested by decree, by legislation. Minimum 25% of its fund needs to be invested domestically within Alberta's borders. And that's, again, me basing it on the virtuous economic cycle. More investment in Alberta, more jobs, more contributions, more investment, and so on and so forth. And that's how you stabilize and undergird your various sectors and infrastructure and other things going on in the province. When I was doing this back and forth with Vanessa, Grok, and every other bit of research that I was doing, approximately for every $1 million invested in Alberta in infrastructure results in about 4 to 7 brand new jobs. So if this fund was invested into private equity for startups, or again just directly invested into municipal bonds, like you got bonds in Edmonton and Calgary that can go to fund infrastructure. Again, you're creating jobs. Creating jobs creates more wealth, more earnings, more contributions, and so on. So I'm not necessarily concerned with direct financial yield. I'm looking for long-term longevity, prosperity.
Well, then you would be looking at the CPP. But
False.
as it relates to that 25%, let's say you get conservatively 10% gains from that 25% you're investing domestically. What if I told you that same 25% could get you 25% gains if you allocated it to the free market, the world market? Which option would you prefer?
I would prefer to invest in my own borders, because again, I'm not looking for the short-term financial yield. I'm looking for the long-term investment and growth of my place of where I live. I want to see jobs, not tomorrow, not next week, not next month. I want to see jobs 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years down the road. So if I'm investing more, this is the whole thing of buy local, support your farmers and all that shit, but just push to a provincial scale. So invest in your province, invest in your borders, invest in your sectors and your economy, and then you're going to reap those benefits and those rewards over the long term. What, as a generalized, very reductive rule of thumb when it comes to investing, but time in the market always beats timing the market. So put your time in investing in your province, and you're going to reap the yields over the longer term in a much more stabilized fashion. And it's better for all of your people.
So the stability of Alberta is the point in question here, in that, do you think that Alberta's economy is going to perform better within the next 10 years or 50 years, let's say 50 years, than the world market? See, that's the key here with respect to investing. if you have localized investments, you're susceptible to the economic winds of the time. Whereas a smart investor, I mean, depending on where you sit at, but you have to have investments within the trends of the day. So that means if your money takes you to someplace in the EU or someplace in Africa, let's say, then that's where the money should go, because that's in the best interest of the citizen, right? The citizen's interest is to get the most out of the money that they're putting in. And let's say there's an oil collapse in Alberta, and 25% of your pension plan is locked into that devastating scenario. Why would you keep it localized? Would you not want to move your funds elsewhere? So I think this percentage point, 25%, I think a reasonable price percentage for a pension plan is like 10%. 10% locally, and then let the free market reign.
Well, if you want to achieve what 306 Shane achieves, you don't do it through a pension plan. You just lower the taxes of the individuals and you let them keep more of their own money, and then the regular taxes that do get paid will pay for the infrastructure. But you don't pick and choose what industries within your own province you want to invest in. I mean, that's what the free market is for, like Josh just said.
When you're considering how you build a pension plan in the first place, it's allocated into certain percentages that will go into high risk, ultra high risk, medium risk, low risk, so on and so forth. So there's only certain portions that go into those type of industries anyways. So when you're building a pension plan, if you wanted to do 20% in Alberta, for example, you could just allocate, a small percentage in the high category for Alberta and a small percentage in the low risk category for Alberta, that kind of thing. So you can still have 20% in Alberta, but perhaps some of it is in the higher risk volatile areas and some of it is in the very stable areas, right? So there's a variety of ways, excuse me, to do that. That doesn't include making it so volatile and reliant on, the volatile industries in Alberta. So you have to consider how the pension plan is overall built in terms of risk anyways. It doesn't necessarily have to be all in something that's super high risk all the time. And generally speaking, when times get tough and the volatility comes and maybe the oil market takes a big hit, that's when an Alberta pension plan could adjust very quickly into moving those funds in advance into more things that are more stable and within Alberta still, right? Like you have that flexibility.
So, in other words, and I'm going to give 306 a hard time here because your original that you wanted it pegged at was 35%. But there are some advantages then to having a lower, in that there's more flexibility to pivot than in economic times, more liquidity available as opposed to being locked into bonds and such. So that's what you're saying, right, Val?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's why I said when I was talking about it, 5% as mandatory and then like a flexibility amount, right? Because God forbid something really terrible happened in Alberta and every industry is in a massive downturn. Well, you want to have the flexibility to, in advance of that downturn, move all that money somewhere it's going to perform better, right? So, but if you're locked into a 20% or 30% versus a 5%, right? I want lots. I want as much money imaginable in a pension plan in Alberta, invested in Alberta in a way that makes sense to get really good returns and for it to be stable and take advantage of stuff. But I don't want to run the risk of, if there is downturns, and there would be because it's Alberta, that there's no flexibility to move it. So there should be perhaps legislation that says 5% is mandatory and maybe even 40% or 50% on top of that is recommended to be in Alberta, but it doesn't necessarily have to. So it's not fixed into there.
Just to bring forward the analogy that I gave you, earlier there, Vanessa, the way that I frame this, Val, and see if you agree with this assessment, but basically when it comes to, what other people were talking about in terms of like, you got to invest where the money is, so to speak. But Alberta, or any type of investment like this, is effectively the ma and pa corner store, right? Compared to Brookfield and BlackRock and all these other big investment asset managers, which are the Walmarts and the other big chains. Everybody continues to invest in those big firms, those big things, because they already pull in so much investment. So there's no incentive. There's no there's very little opportunity, I think, or willingness to invest in a smaller operation, the smaller ma and pa store like the province of Alberta. And so you're never going to, I think, encourage private investment on the scale that you necessarily want or need when it comes to, again, trying to prepare for your future. The Heritage Fund of Alberta is, only at like what, $30 billion or whatever it is. So there's not a ton kicking around for a rainy day. So this is why I'm saying these numbers need to be looked at on a larger scale investment within the province in order to make that ma and pa shop able to compete with the likes of the Walmart, the big chains, around. That's the way that I look at it. People invest in BlackRock because everybody invests in BlackRock, which therefore fuels more investment in BlackRock, and then no one's going to invest anywhere else. So that's why this fund, should it get set up and established, needs to have that legislated amount. And that's why, to me, CPP only being invested domestically at a rate of 12% is pathetic.
I just want to ask, can I just ask 306 a question to make sure I understand what he's saying correctly? So you're saying that the government should take my money and invest it in a mom and pop shop instead of investing it into like the likes of a Costco or a Walmart that pays dividends?
Short answer is yes, Steve. Again, it's money that has already been
Completely
taken from
ridiculous.
you.
It's my money.
Okay, fine. But it's already
and
money
I want
that's
the
been taken from
Costco
you.
dividends rather than
It's already money been taken from you.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes it better. I want dividends from Costco than funding some mom and pop shop hardware store trying to compete with Home Depot. I mean, it makes no sense.
It makes no
That's
sense
where
to
I
you.
was going to go.
I want to see my province and my land succeed. I want to see jobs again 100 years out, 200 years out.
Well, do that with your own money by starting some own
Oh,
business. You don't take my money to invest it where you see fit. Go ahead,
I was
Josh.
getting in the way of something. I'm sorry. I was jumping in at the wrong time there. My bad. Those are my thoughts as well, Steve. And that's small businesses are extremely volatile. A lot of them don't last beyond 3 years. So there's a lot of risk there. Now we have to remember that the amount of assets Alberta is going to get largely determines what the percentage is going to be at the start. So it's likely going to be very high. And if it's very high, that's less money for the Alberta citizen to spend as they will. But also that's not guaranteeing that the money you extract from them is going to be invested wisely to make up for the percentage being so high. So I think at this point there has to be a compromise, because you're not going to be getting a lot of money from the Canadian government when you withdraw. So what money you have, you can't be risky with it, and I think small businesses are a risk.
Wasn't saying directly invest in small businesses. It was a fucking analogy.
Well, sorry if I misunderstood you because I just asked. But I mean, we want to encourage risk taking. So we want people to keep more of their money, because it's the risk takers and the entrepreneurs that really shape the beauty of any community that they're in. I mean, even the beautiful American suburbs, I forget the guy's name, but it was an entrepreneur who decided to build them this way. And I think he started in New York City, somewhere around there. Sorry, I don't have my history at the tip of my tongue here. But like if you go to any of these towns, it's the entrepreneurs that make it unique. It's not, and we want them to be able to risk their money, and we don't want to fund things because then we're just picking and choosing what we'll want to see down the street. But we don't want the entrepreneur who's hopefully doing the research, what the successful ones are, and they'll know what to start, and they'll know what to improve upon the business to make it last. And that's what really creates the beauty of any community and ultimate country. It depends on how far out you spread it.
All right. Well,
Sorry.
No,
A
go
pension
ahead, Steve.
plan discourages risk. It's a safety net, and that's what we don't want. We want risk. The more risk, the better it is for everybody. And you need to be able to fail. And we don't want people to fail, but we need that freedom.
I'll put the question to you, Vanessa, to round this off. In the ideal Alberta pension plan, would you? Pardon me. Sorry, there was many different questions there. Should Alberta have a pension plan? Yes or no, and why?
Well, that is not exactly an easy question to answer. However, I will say this. What advantage an Alberta pension plan would have is that when it comes to the investment strategy that would have to go into building it from whatever money is pulled out of CPP, they're not going to have the same 60-year head start that the CPP and Quebec has. So it would give Alberta the opportunity, and I believe they would have already the ambition, to work to grow that thing as fast as possible to show off exactly how Alberta is underestimated and that it can compete. So from that angle, I can definitely see why that would be pursued, if no other way than to simply say, listen, we're we can do it, right? But that's just me. And the thing is, the reason, of course, we've been exploring this whole topic here, it is extremely complex. There are many different facets. In my research, I've had to break it off into two parts, actually. One, just to go over the history of why a pension plan, how old it is, and why it was created in the first place, to separate it out from what are we looking at right now. And even at that, I'm only scratching the surface. So it's huge, and we'll never get to cover all of it. But it is important to at least take this opportunity to look at and explore it. And I think this is really beneficial because we'll give people will be able to go away from here and talk more about it and have more ideas and do more research. So there's the conversation can only grow.
Well, it's probably a good place to wrap it up.
I would say I'm going to drop our speakers down. I'm going to keep the panel up here for last thoughts, and then we're going to close out the space. So, Steve, I'd love to hear your last thoughts.
I'd just like to thank you again, and Josh, for inviting me to be a speaker this week again. And I would just say that I think Alberta is better off not having its own pension plan for reasons that we stated and that you mentioned in the article. We shouldn't be Alberta doesn't need to be what word am I looking for here? Tempted to use immigration as a fund for the pension plan, and also young people can't afford houses. It's hard. Cost of living is way up. The more money in their pockets right now is much better for them.
All right, thank you, Steve. You have a great night, and we'll go on to Josh next.
Yes, excellent discussion. Who knew that you could talk about pensions for, I don't know, about 2.5 hours on this platform? Excellent. I'm really looking forward to the next, the journey ahead, really. There's 4 more episodes. So as mentioned, I'm going to be keeping an eye on who's involved. Who's involved is a point of this that I'm very curious about. Great discussion. Thanks again for having me. Back to you.
Well, and thank you for participating, Josh. It's you bring something to the conversation. Certainly, you make us think about what it is we're angles we're not considering. Val, love to hear your final thoughts.
Final thoughts, Josh, who could talk about pensions for an hour or more? This gal. I did it for many years. It always came up. So it's a little tedious to cover it now because I moved away from that industry for a reason. but this is super important. And I think we covered a lot of very interesting, nuanced spots that I never would have considered, Vanessa. And in the end, I think that I've actually solidified more onto the side of Alberta having its own pension plan. I think there's still some risks in terms of something Steve mentioned and a couple of others, like who might manage the money, and any of that corruption that we might see in the Liberal federal government creeping in over time. That's definitely a concern. But I'm more optimistic now having this conversation, and I'm really glad to hear a lot of different opinions on it and different information on it. I think we covered a very, very good general basis on how it works and how it could work and all the intricacies in between. So thank you very much, Vanessa, for hosting this space, and it's been really great talking to everybody.
Well, and thank you very much for co-hosting. And I really do, I have to say, appreciate that you do have a background in finance, because even for me, now I've had to do days and days worth of research and to just be competent enough to broach the subject in the first place. And it has been an eye opener, and really it just at the same time demonstrates to me exactly how much I don't know. But it is. I am very grateful that you've got some of this knowledge here that can help balance some of this out, because I'm still very much a novice in this regard. So I really appreciate your contribution. Next week, I do believe we're going to be looking at immigration. What do you think about that?
That is going to be one heck of a hot topic. And I expect to hear many different opinions and many different sides. So it is going to be very intricate and very interesting.
No doubt, no doubt. Well, thank you very much, Val, and I'll drop you down and say my final last thoughts here. So, honestly, this has been a real pleasure to go over this topic. It's not something we would normally have any occasion to talk about, except that the Alberta Next Panel, of course, is making this one of their points as they go through and do their tour. Could an Alberta pension plan leverage the province's younger workforce and economic strengths to deliver better benefits and lower costs? Well, I mean, I guess we'll find out. But maybe perhaps the ultimate question here is, can Alberta be the ultimate comeback kid and outperform the CPP and QPP and create a fund that can dwarf them both? And I think that's perhaps one of the challenges they're really considering here. But it will be interesting to see, as the feedback, as these Alberta Next panels roll out, how people start talking about that conversation. But in any event, I want to thank you very much, all of our panel and the people who came up to speak afterwards. I'm grateful that you keep coming to our spaces to listen in and discuss these topics. And I look forward to seeing you next week at 6 o'clock when we do our next Liberal Discourse on the Alberta Next Panel. Have a great night, guys.